It's strange to think that, insofar as technical documents are concerned, our historical record only dates back a few centuries. We've kept the declarations of war, the writings concerning kings and their kingdoms, but very little remains in the way of science. The ability to peer back in time, to view the plans of the inventors that defined generations prior, to see their designs just as they saw them, whether they were given physical form or not, is a capability fairly unique to our position in history. We know more of the process, the successes and the failures that were endured by the inventors of the microchip than those of the aqueduct. But to prevent the story of the former's invention from becoming lost too, it's essential that we keep our stores of drawings, blueprints, and diagrams, keep the proof that there were human hands who built these things. Each piece of evidence is vital to preserving the history of technology and of our society. The dream of flight, that of freeing oneself from the restraints of gravity and taking to the skies by some mechanical means, has been shared by countless multitudes of people throughout history, even the ones that lived before we gave a name to the force they set about fighting. It is a great injustice, then, how much of the work of the first would-be pilots remains undiscovered or indiscoverable. The fact that so many pages of humanity's long story with flight have been lost or damaged makes those we have left so much more precious, and the discovery of each missing leaf so very salient. Writing for the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, Peter Jacob recounts how, until the 19th century, Leonardo da Vinci was generally known only as a painter. Little or nothing of his sculpture or engineering work survived, and his notebooks, the only evidence of his insatiable curiosity and his fertile mind regarding science and technology, had long since been dispersed in private hands. The discovery of Leonardo's codices put back the dates at which we supposed the first theories of aerodynamics were being developed. He had studied birds and determined the relationship between wing angle and lift. He produced over 500 sketches depicting theoretical flying machines, and amongst them we found demonstrations of his growing understanding. The great flapping wingspans that he hoped would one day lift a person. None of this is to say that Da Vinci was the only person to independently develop these ideas, but the fact we can point to him doing so at the time he did shows how humankind's insatiable drive to push the boundaries of understanding is not limited to our technological era. Jacob concludes, Leonardo lived a 15th century life, but a vision of the modern world spread before his mind's eye. Today, we take the convenience of flight for granted. We have brought the continents themselves closer together with the speed of the aeroplane. The Atlantic, once seemingly infinite in proportion, made but an 8-hour nuisance for holiday-goers. Since the Yankee Clipper first began ferrying the public across the now literal pond in 1939, we have grown accustomed to the ever-present aircraft in our skies. Numerous are our advancements since. Our propulsion methods now are testaments to our dedication to making things too heavy to float soar. Most people who have flown today have never flown in anything but a jetliner, and are entirely unfamiliar with the history of the technology. They can be unaware that before the turbofans taking us across the skies of today, it was propellers like those of the Clipper that lifted us through the clouds. But even prior to that, over a decade before the first fixed-wing passenger service, there were travelers crossing the Atlantic far above its ancient waters. There was a period before we properly understood aerodynamics that we could fly. Perhaps it was too early to go without tragedy, running before we could walk, but if we only did things we perfectly grasped the mechanics of, we wouldn't have taken our first steps into the universe. The airship is a technology whose place in history endlessly fascinates me. a vital part of our coming relationship with the skies, but one which our material sciences could not yet make sustainable. In a few decades, we went from uncontrolled balloon flight to leisurely circumnavigating the world. Then, in only a handful more, the giants we used to do so were practically extinct. For almost as long as they have existed, airships have been aliens. They were alien to those who witnessed the construction of the first dirigibles, unlike anything of the time and with abilities entirely unheard of. Equally today, with their oblate silhouettes casting shadow over a great many pieces of media, they are still just as strange, and seeing one in person makes for an otherworldly encounter. Perhaps it is their contemporary rarity, or the grandeur that could have been, or the link we perceive between them and the short-lived optimistic futurism of the early 20th century. Any or all of these do make their pervasiveness in fictional alternate histories so understandable. The presence of airships in a work is practically a genre marker. For characters in a steampunk novel to travel the skies by any other means would be nigh heretical. By focusing on them, audiences intuit that the technology of a world presented has taken a dramatically different path to that of our own. Perhaps they entered into the age of air travel more knowledgeable than us, with the precaution and the planning to avoid the fatalities our earliest craft wrought. Then again, the societies in these pieces are rarely presented as disciplined in their research. Much more often, the state we find them in is one of technological stagnation. In the book series Mortal Engines, a passable story is supported by some great world-building. Its steampunk setting is not an alternative past, but a prophetic future, one in which humanity brought technology back centuries, with a globe-spanning nuclear war. When its characters are not traveling in the book's namesake motorized cities, they're flying over the continental wastes in crude airships, the knowledge or ability to perform heavy-than-air flight seemingly lost in the fallout. Now, for a brief aside, the movie, whose footage I am using here, does change the design of the airships to some strange hybrid craft, the likes of which never existed in reality. This completely kills the metaphor, though the film does seem fairly content with dragging much of the book's imagery through the particularly irradiated mud of old Europe.
Meanwhile, the world's gonna keep getting smaller. And I've been feeling a bit too big to fit. It happens a lot, and this claustrophobic response is a bug that I'm trying to fix.
Not only for its role as predecessor to the aeroplane, but by the very nature of being a late 19th, early 20th century invention, the airship exists at the threshold between our technological past and present, between the old ways and the new, a machine forever bound to the time it was created, despite being one I long to see take off today. Do they have no place in the modern world then? Well, yes, they are possible solutions to a few logistical niches, but to imagine them replacing the aeroplanes they predated is an exercise in vanity, though one the craft's buoyant mystique makes ever so enticing. Regardless of how upsetting it may be to my internal aerial romantic, I must concede that these beautifully flawed machines did more as spectacle than as vehicle. Those who worked on them did achieve great feats and contributed much to the coming generation of innovators. We truly would not be in the same position without those earliest pioneers. But it is the fate of every great inventor to have their creations outdone by those who they inspire. Though they would continue to be prominent displays of technological prowess, and as previously stated, fly the first passengers between Europe and the Americas, the fate of the airship could be seen as far back as the First World War. When the first Zeppelins entered British airspace, they were entirely unopposed at altitude, the heavier-than-air craft of the Royal Flying Corps completely unable to engage. Even when within the service ceiling of enemy biplanes, they remained entirely unaffected by traditional munitions, a half-inch hole in the envelope no more threatening to their internal volume than that of a pinprick to a water bottle. This period of invulnerability would not last forever, though. Aeroplane engineers, spurred on by the challenge of the dirigible, would develop lighter and more efficient designs, allowing their pilots to engage the Germans eye to eye. At the same time, the first incendiary rounds entered service, equipping Leif Robinson with the tools he needed to ignite the Schutzlands 11 and end the enemy's air superiority. During the course of the war, the Zeppelin was matched, overtaken, shot down, and replaced in almost every capacity by that which it begun impervious to. Its wartime activity contributed in no uncertain terms to its own commercial obsolescence, and, in no small part, to the coming of the fixed-wing marvels that connect our skies today. Often, a given document can serve as a time capsule for a generation's understanding or the specific aspirations that they hold. The flying machines Da Vinci illustrated attempted, for the most part, to copy the birds he saw going where he so very much wanted to go himself. The Age of Enlightenment had engineers ditching these attempts at biomimicry. The drawings they made were of people held aloft by a variety of balloon-laden aliens. Then, at the beginning of the 20th century, humanity's foremost scientists were devising methods by which to push their aeroplanes ever higher into our atmosphere. And by its middle, a different group were using means previously unheard of to push entirely out of it. To travel between continents was one thing, but to fly between planets? Planning for this reality was very quickly becoming a subject of national importance. As the Apollo program prepared to send the first manned mission to our moon, public support for space exploration had never been higher, and it was in the latter half of 1969 that President Nixon received the official report of the Space Task Group. The collection of experts that presented these plans to him were charged with defining the next steps humanity would take on its journey into the cosmos. They proposed a system of navigational satellites, discussed the inevitable expansion of lunar infrastructure, and planned a manned mission to Mars. A manned mission which would take place in 1981. But there were to be no boots on the red planet's rubicund regolith that year, nor any year leading up to our own. Were they overly ambitious? Did they make unfounded assumptions as to our rate of scientific progress? Perhaps they did, in some places, but that's far from the whole of it. If you really want to understand the cause of this delay, what's kept our manned spaceflight programs so conservative in their aspirations, you need only view the funding records of NASA or its contemporaries. The space race, as we've taken to calling it, the competition that existed between the two great superpowers of the 1960s, was the leading cause for the most transformative decade for our technology. The battle for scientific dominance could have been fought on any front, just for the sake of one state to temporarily assert itself more advanced than the other. The fact it was fought in space, the final frontier, was supposed to establish the United States as the undisputed paragon of technological development. It did seem that way for a while, but as the interests of government turned earthwards, and we stopped voyaging beyond Earth's orbit, the frontier once again became unsettled wilds. There was interest, there was appetite, there remained just as many, if not more, physicists and astronomers eager to push humankind further. But as it was no longer necessary for the nation to justify to the world its place atop the highest podium there ever was, they never received the chance we all needed them to. As I've said, Our stagnant spaceflight programs were never a problem of individual motivation. The whole globe had been inspired by pictures of people out there in the ether. The coming generation brought up in a world that told them they'd be the ones piloting our future, a home in orbit and a holiday on Mars. The capacity to achieve all of this existed in equal amounts in the first space-educated generation as it does amongst those in our schools today. So what if there was something that could provide those willing a chance? Something that could refocus national attention on the unknown, that through the temporary extension of competition could alter the trajectory of technology and the history it facilitates. What if, for one specific example, the Soviets landed on the moon first?
My computer keeps getting older, but it feels like I'm staying the same age. Up to the minute, my whole history's in it, and I'm floating somewhere in space.
It's easy to look at the timeline of the show For All Mankind and write it off as naively utopian. To look at the technology it presents us with and say, it's too early for this, we didn't have that for another 5, 10, 15 years. Electric cars in 1983? Unlikely. Though perhaps it's not as unlikely as you'd think. During the development of its moon rovers, NASA funded research into new and more compact battery technology. Had their lunar aspirations not been cut short, it's likely they would have further refined their energy storage technology, and, as with much of the work they did during the Apollo program, we could be seeing the benefits Earthside in only a handful of years. By some metrics, For All Mankind's alternate history is under-ambitious. The astronauts of the show first stepped foot on Mars in 1995, 14 years after the estimate received by Nixon. It is the story of humanity's path towards a better world. How by going down the road untaken, we could have accelerated social and technological progress for the better. The path is, however, treacherous in its bends, and its end masked by a great many obstacles. You need to be focused and make sacrifices to stay on it. That's one thing For All Mankind does very well, showing the trials and tribulations of those pushing us forwards.
With what you've been through, do you feel that it's still worth it?
Worth it? I mean, it's dangerous. Lives have been lost, and honestly, probably more will be lost. But every one of us knew the risks before we joined. The toll it takes on us and on the ones we love. But we all signed up just the same. It's the price we pay to push forward, to explore the universe, wander into the unknown, pushing ourselves to the limits of what's possible.
It has no fixed protagonist. There is no main character in the history of technology, just people working towards a common goal. Betterment for all mankind.
So yes, I think it's worth it. Because no matter how hard it is now, when we look to the future, we see that things can get better. I do believe that.
Management leaks program secrets, and astronauts give their lives, all to safeguard their fellow pioneers and the future of humanity itself. Yes, there are players with more selfish agendas. Tracy Stevens once determined for her presence in space to set a precedent for the coming generation of spacefaring women, is, by the second season, focused entirely on cultivating her celebrity. But after the return of her ex-husband to the moon, she finds her true purpose again, and her time on the show ultimately concludes with them both giving their lives for the lunar base. The effect of having it be an alternate history is twofold. When watching it, seeing its spacecraft as they reach beyond our own, and seeing its astronauts go where no one of our world has ever gone, a small part of you does get upset, angry even. Why haven't we been able to do this? Why haven't we gone there? To believe in the narrative of the show is to acknowledge that we could have. It is a work of fiction, so some parts will be unrealistic, but we got damn close to a lot of it. In designing the technology of For All Mankind, its creators made extensive use of real-world plans from the space program, plans which could have become a reality if our NASA had the funding of the shows. But it is also a piece of media that exists today, one which has these effects on people of our timeline. It demonstrates what could have been, but also what could yet be. Its history takes cues from the one the Apollo generation predicted, but builds on it with modern insights. It's not just their dream, it also stands to be ours, and thanks to their work, we've never been in a better position to achieve it.
We're all becoming our parents. Little by little, the traits we've inherited and are programmed inside our genetics float up from the bottom and into our heads.
Lieutenant Commander Data of the Star Trek universe, during his appearances across the run of The Next Generation, is himself an anachronism. The show's Federation, for all its far-future tech, its replicators, and its matter-antimatter reactors, has yet failed to create a sentient computer. When an outcast scientist succeeds, but dies without preserving his research, his creation is left to live in a world less advanced than he. Data is an android, stronger than any human and smarter than any of their machines. By every quantitative measure, he is superior to his crewmates. But his role upon their shared starship, as it is in the show as a whole, is not to diminish their efforts, but to complement them, and to provide his view of the human condition from outside of it. Season 7, Episode 13 is a perfect example of this. After being sent to recover a radioactive probe off-screen, Data loses his memory and finds himself in a small village on Barkon 4, a world with a technology level similar to that of Renaissance Europe. Data is therefore more out of place than we have ever seen him, somewhere where he otherwise never would have gone. Data, and the plutonium sample he brought with him, are unlike anything the villagers have even the language to describe, and so they rely on conjecture. Data is an Iceman from the mountains, the rock he brought with him a type of metal unique to his home. These are assumptions made from the limited knowledge of the townsfolk, only erroneous to us because our awareness is so much broader. Any judgment we pass would be anachronistic. If the people of Barkon 4 are to take at least as long as us in advancing their technology, we are observing them a minimum of 300 years removed.
Rock, fire, sky, and water are the basic elements of the universe. They can be found in every object, every animal, every person, everything. The rock in this wood can be felt by its weight and hardness. If we expose the wood to flame, we can encourage the fire within the wood to show itself. We can also see smoke, which is a part of the sky. The water in wood is difficult to see. Sometimes the elements are buried deep within the objects, but the four elements are always there.
I do not believe that is correct.
Oh?
I believe you are reasoning by analogy, classifying objects and phenomena according to superficial observation rather than empirical evidence.
Data's arrival in the village comes at an inflection point in the society's understanding. The scientific method had only recently gained acceptance, and their models of the world reflect that. Conveniently for the villagers and the runtime of the episode, Data retains his strict approach to problem solving and his skepticism of anything anecdotal. His study into the rock of unknown origins ends up saving the lives of the townsfolk.
As you can see, the cloth becomes luminescent when it is exposed to an energy source. This pendant also appears to be an energy source.
Where is this pattern of light coming from?
I believe a stream of particles is emanating from the metallic pendant and hitting the cloth.
I don't see any particles coming from the pendant.
You will see there are. I can even block them.
Data discovers for the villagers and rediscovers for himself the phenomena of radioactivity. And as Data explains his method, the town doctor goes from dismissing his ideas to acknowledging their worth. He is a thinking machine from the year 2338. She is a village doctor who had never seen such a happening. Her acceptance of the theory shows far more about her intelligence than that of the android.
I know that I seem like a simple machine, but I can just get my head around it. If the world keeps getting smaller and smaller and weirder the older I get.
It's tempting to compare Data's position amongst the villagers, or even his own crew, to that of ours in relation to past thinkers. Yes, he does exhibit a much more advanced set of scientific sensibilities than his colleagues, but such is his nature. They were programmed into him. His positronic brain is running entirely different software to that of our fleshy skull computers. We will never upgrade from ours to his. No amount of enlightenment will do that. What is, however, comparable, no great version change betwixt, are 15th century people and 21st century people, as are people born pre-war and people born today. A person's innate capacity to innovate is not determined by the age they grew up in. That only affects the level to which they can do so. Now, we can't know our future, or what its denizens would think of us, what world-altering technologies are just around the corner, and what tools in use today would be considered antiquated by the better informed. We simply can't know how many of our oversights will be denounced by our descendants. The same has been true for every inventor at every time throughout all of history. But still, knowing the impermanence of everything they would create, they created nonetheless. We owe our position in history, each cross-ocean flight and each satellite-transmitted call, to every previous member of our species. We could not have made it so far above our home planet without their contributions. Even the pursuit of technologies we no longer use or consider dated benefited us, the impractical helping reveal the practical, just as the airship did the aeroplane. Now, the tech bro would attribute our modern infrastructure to capitalism and its supposed power to always find the most efficient solution. But progress is not defined by whatever flying taxi pod-based transport startup Silicon Valley has managed to cough up this year. No, as much as the machine men of Palo Alto would like, their grip on tech is not an iron one. The transport system of tomorrow, whatever that may mean to them, almost always means to us another example of how the market never did tend towards efficiency. The aerospace billionaires of today only exist because of the past successes of government-funded programs. All they can do now is create new means of exploitation or actively degenerate existing infrastructure. Engineers who would have taken us, as in humanity, to Mars, are stuck building the pet projects of the impotent. True change is not achieved because a precious few minds were given the chance to partake in the research their benefactors desired. Leonardo da Vinci could only afford to spend time studying birds and developing his theories of aerodynamics because he was lucky that some wealthy nobles had granted him their favor, even if their motive for doing so was ulterior, for the status afforded by owning one of his paintings, or of the need to employ an established military engineer. People are capable of great things if given the chance. The more people you can give a chance to, the more great things we will all get to see. More than anything, technology is what separates what is from what was. The present is only different from the past because of the engineers who built it. History, as a concept, only exists because we have the means to preserve it. In books, as blueprints across backups, we hold in perpetuity the contemporary, the transitory, and the ephemeral. History is an ever-growing record of how the world has changed and the means by which we changed it. Preserve it, grow it, let more people add to it. You owe this much to those who come after you.